All right, we'll jump in here. We're doing the Imitation of Christ because it was one of the two books that Vivekananda carried with him everywhere. And somebody said something interesting, to me the other day. It might have been you, Bhagavan. I don't know who it was, but somebody mentioned because I had mentioned. Oh no, it was a comment on the YouTube channel after the class, because last week in the class, or the week before that, we went through sort of a tough chapter that had a lot of odd things that we sort of had to talk through. And I was getting a little frustrated, and I was saying, I wonder why Vivekananda carried this book. Yeah, why did he carry this one with him everywhere? And someone said in the comments that well, maybe he was reading it sort of in preparation for coming to the West. Maybe he was carrying it with him to sort of get an idea of Christian thought and whatnot. And I thought, well, that was a very interesting idea. I imagine that there probably was some of that in there for him. But it is a beautiful text. There are a lot of wonderful points in here. On this chapter, we're going on acquiring patience in the struggle against concupiscence, something like that, which just means lust. So a very pretty word for a somewhat base struggle. And patience is because that's a long-term struggle that takes a long time, because it's not a balanced scale. It's the body's always producing its hormones and its notions that kind of tip the balance in that direction. That's why Ramakrishna says that the battle with lust really doesn't disappear completely until realization. So there's always going to be a little bit of a nag in the back of the mind with it. And so he's going to do a chapter here on acquiring patience with that, how not to get frustrated, how not to feel defeated, or how to not, just get into a state of anxiety around it. So it starts off, the disciple says, "Oh, my Lord God, I can see that patience is very necessary for me, for this life is full of many disturbing things. No matter how I may plan my life so as to have peace, life cannot be without struggle and sorrow." And Christ responds, "My child, certainly this is true. It is not my will that you look for peace without temptations or difficulties. On the contrary, you must believe that you have found peace when you have been tried by tribulations and adversity. If you say that you cannot stand much suffering, how will you endure the fires of purgatory?" This nonsense, this idea that our peace, our inner peace, is not conditional. Right? It's not a set of circumstances and conditions that gives us peace. That's worldly peace. Worldly peace is when you get everything going your way, and it happens very rarely that we ever get everything going our way. But that's how we kind of define our peace in the world. Are you content? Are you happy? Well, after I get my car, after I get my house, after I get married, after I have kids, after this, after that, then I'll be content. Then I can sit down and rest. But that's not the case in life. Life is always throwing up contrary conditions to our contentment or happiness. And so this is the importance of the inner shrine. This is why I talk about this all the time, because we have to discover the shrine in the heart within. We have to go inside and spend time in our inner world and find this quiet place that does not attract attention at all. It doesn't call the mind at all. And so that's why it's so difficult to find our way back there, because there's nothing there to call us, because it's completely still, completely balanced. We're on page 124, beginning of chapter 12, Priya. So, sure. And here comes Greg. Good. Right. And so we want to find this place. And once you find that, and the way that I'm not sure if it's obvious for everybody where it is. I don't know how to talk about these things in that way. But for me, I kind of found my inner space by following the feelings of love. Like when you are saying the mantra, and that bhav, or that joy, is starting to form. and the mantra's going on rather automatically since you've made a habit of it, you can sort of pay attention. Where is this feeling of love arising from? Where is this warmth, this gentleness? Where does it come from? And you find that it comes from the storehouse of love, from here within the heart chakra, I guess, if you're going to talk in those terms, or the cave of the heart, according to St. John of the Cross, or the inner shrine. And this is where we do our worship. And so we create an atmosphere within ourselves by doing our worship here, by emanating our prayers from here, by being aware of the presence from here. And what this does is it gives us that inner atmosphere that's sacred, that we then carry with us through the day, and that we can experience and have access to even when the circumstances and conditions of the day don't allow us to have peace or don't allow us to be still. When we go here, we can always know that there is peace here, that there is love here, that there is strength here. And so this is the importance of finding that shrine within, and then doing your practice there, being consistent in it, and adding to that atmosphere. It's just like any manifested temple. You know, if you have a temple and people go there and do serious spiritual practice in that temple, or serious worship there, it gets an atmosphere. You know, it's one of the things that I really enjoy in going into churches when I'm around Europe, or going into temples in India, is that there is always that stillness, that wonderful peace there. And that comes from people doing their practice there, over time. And so it's the same with your shrine in the heart. If you go there regularly and you honestly practice with sincerity and earnestness, and you spend that time doing your japam, and you do that for a while, you begin to build an atmosphere inside. You begin to add that vibration to your own inner temple. And so that's what we're talking about here. He's saying, so don't find a peace that's based on conditions and circumstances. Find the peace that passes understanding. Find the peace within that's not conditional. Always choose the lesser of two evils. Therefore, try to bear the evils of this life patiently for the love of God. Right? So again, love for the divine, love for love's sake is our motive. And we try and bear with the difficulties in our world, or in our life, in our mind, in our bodies, in our characters, wherever they might be coming up for us, because of love, because of the love for God, not out of a fear-based thing, because, which many of us in the West anyway, were raised with that fear-based religion where, God, like Santa Claus, was keeping a list and checking it twice to find out who's naughty and nice, And so a lot of our aversion to wrongdoing was out of fear of hell, or fear of, loss or condemnation or whatnot. But really, we want that to change. That's all right in the beginning. Vivekananda said religion begins in fear of the unknown, but that it has to end in love, right? That we have to move out of that place of fear. And that happens as we develop that relationship with the divine within, when we become to know the nature of the beloved. And through practice and through communion with that presence within, we become familiar with that, and that fear goes away, and life is inspired by love and not driven by fear at that point. So try to bear the evils of this life patiently for the love of God, that you may escape greater pains in the world to come. Do you think that worldly persons suffer little or nothing? You will find this is not so, even among the most privileged, right? And this drawing the difference between spiritual and worldly people, I don't know what the value is of comparing those. I don't think you can break the world into two pieces like that. All of us suffer, and all of us are struggling. And no matter whether you're spiritual, religious, or not, if you behave against your nature, the nature of Satchitananda in you, there's going to be suffering. If you're driven by desires, there's going to be suffering. It's regardless of religion or practice. This is a common human thing, right? And so I always prefer. I don't. This is one of the things I really appreciated about the Vedanta is that it doesn't break the world into two halves immediately, so that you have to go around and determine which side everybody's on. I think that that's part of a lot of our problems in the world is because we've been taught to think like that. We are all humans. We're brothers and sisters, all of us. And we're all trying to get along in this life and trying to find our peace and trying to find our contentment, trying to share our love, express our love, fall in love. That there's a great deal of camaraderie that exists naturally between us if we don't step into these egoistic states of division, of putting people into groups and making assumptions about those groups. I'm quite disturbed quite often online because, so often I'll read somebody who's conservative will write something about, oh, those liberals are always believing X, Y, and Z. And I'll read that and I'll be like, wait a minute, I'm a liberal. I don't think I don't think that way. Why are you saying all liberals think that way? Not all liberals think that way. And it goes from the other side to the other side as well. Liberals talking about conservatives. And very rarely is that and very rarely is that an accurate way of viewing the world. And it's very detrimental. It makes the world very easy and very two-dimensional. And human life is never easy and two-dimensional. There's always an enormous amount of nuance. Nobody does anything that they don't believe is right. And so for us, if we're going to have that conversation with each other, it's up to us to ask enough questions and to investigate the other person enough to find that common ground, to find where they're standing. That allows them to think that what they believe or what they're doing is right, even though I, in my circumstance, may not think it is. It's up to me, first of all, to understand their position and to understand where they're coming from before I say anything, before I try and teach, before I try and correct, before I try and be snarky, whatever it is. It's your job first, and especially as Vedantins, this is a wonderful thing for us because as a Vedantin, we are in a unique position where we can sit down with people from any background and any tradition, and we can worship with them. It doesn't matter whether they're Catholic, whether they're Islamic, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Hindu or Buddhist. As a Vedantin, we know that we are all moving toward the same oneness. We're all moving toward the same ideal. And, I always feel like teaching doesn't happen until the student asks a question, right? We don't, Swami Prabhupada really taught me that early on, after I'd been in the monastery almost 10 years, my father, I was talking to him on the phone and, he called and he said, so what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm out weeding the garden. I said, then I've got to clean the bathrooms in the temple for the service tomorrow. And he says, how come every time I call, you're always either cleaning up or cooking or washing dishes or doing the bathrooms? He said, when are you going to teach? When are you going to start lecturing? When is this you're going to start doing something worthwhile with your life? You're over 40 and you're just running around cleaning up after everyone. And I was a little disturbed by that. I didn't really know what to say about that. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but it sounded very true to me. And so I went to Swami Prabhupada and I told him about that conversation. And Swami Prabhupada says, oh, see, don't worry. He says, you are a teacher when people ask you for teaching. You're not a teacher when you decide you're a teacher. A teacher is a teacher when they have a life and a disposition that's worth learning from. And so he says, focus now on developing an inner character that is worth teaching, that is worth learning about. He said, that's your job. And don't worry. Don't think in those terms. Mother will use everyone at the time. Oh, she's using everyone all the time, but she'll use them in that way when it's time. When people think that they want to ask a question of you. And so this is what we do. This is how we go. So Do you think that worldly persons suffer little or nothing? You will find this is not so, even among the most privileged. But perhaps you will say that others have many pleasures and follow their own will, so much that they will count their adversities as small. Really, what he's saying here is this problem. If you're comparing yourself to others and trying to figure out where you are by comparing yourself with others and getting yourself in a pecking order on a list, don't do that. You are going to find nothing but hideousness there. It's going to develop ego if you do put yourself high up on the list of the pecking order. It's going to always induce a certain amount of stress, because you're in a relative world, and sometimes you're going to be in a room full of smart people, and sometimes you're going to be in a room full of not so smart people. What's the value of measuring yourself according to that? Measure yourself against your own standard, and work within your own standard. That is your standard and your measure, and it belongs to no one else. So you measure yourself only, and you don't have to measure others at all. See God in them. Ignore the personality, ignore the egoism, ignore whatever you can, put it aside, and look for the beloved in them. Look to see an ideal in them. Look to see goodness in them. Look to see virtue in them. Don't go around measuring. Don't pull out your measuring stick to find out how you're doing. It's meaningless in the grand scheme of things, and it never brings around a healthy result. So he's kind of talking around that. He hasn't challenged that notion yet, but this is what he's saying. People always say that others have many pleasures. If you're looking at other people, you're only projecting yourself on them. You look at someone who's happy, right? And you say, oh gosh, I wish I was happy as such and such. Well, you don't know how such and such is when they're alone. You don't know how they are when they get home and sit on the edge of their bed with no one else around. You don't know if they break into tears, if they're terribly sad in their life, or if in fact they are always happy. You don't know. You project these things. So take care of your relationship with the moment. Find your bliss in this moment. Find your relationship with God in this sacred moment, and nurture that. Hold on to that. Live in that. We don't know anything about any mind but our own mind, right? And so that's why Mother says, don't judge others. Don't don't notice their faults. Don't notice their blemishes. If they did a good thing for you once upon a time, remember that one thing that they did good for you, even if they've done 10 things that were bad for you. Always remember the good in others, was Mother's teaching. He says, certainly it is true that they have their own way now, but how long do you think that will last? For as smoke vanishes into thin air, so shall they who are rich in this world's goods, leaving not a trace of the pleasures they once enjoyed. Right? Everything is temporary. That's all we have to know. Don't look at someone and think, oh, they're rich, they must be happy. In that, you betray an untruth, that riches make one happy. We know that that's not true. Look, if you believe that's true, then I would encourage you to get Star Magazine just one time to read up on celebrity. Go out there and find these people that seem to have everything. These people that get to do the Oscars, and with all that glamour and all of that exclusivity and all of that accomplishment, and you think, boy, that would be so nice. Go and read about their lives. Go take a look and see the stress that induces for them, the challenges that they have, even in that level, and also how unreal it is. I'm going to take a moment here just to talk about that, because when I was at Hollywood, the monastery there is only 2 blocks from Hollywood and Vine, which is only about 4 blocks, maybe 5 blocks from where the Oscars happen every year. And so my first year, when I'd gotten posted to Hollywood, when it became Oscars, when it was Oscar day, I actually thought, I'm going to walk down over there and have a look at this place. And so I walked over there, and of course, it took some trickery on my part, because they had several checkpoints. You couldn't really get very close. But I learned long ago that if you walk like you know where you're going, and you walk with a certain amount of authority in your step, and don't let on that you don't know where you are, where you're going. You can get quite a few places in life. I got through 4 checkpoints without being stopped, got all the way up to the 5th one, which was right there at the chain link fence, right at the red carpet where the limousines were pulling up. Here's what I learned. It's all fake. You know, around the corner from the Oscars, about 2 blocks up the street on I think it's called Franklin or something up there, there's a big parking lot. And all the limousines are parked there, and they've all got big numbers on their hood. And that's where all the people, all the stars are sitting. Not glamorous. It's hot. There's no services for them. They're all in their cars. And when their number gets called, their car goes out, circles around the block, comes in, and they, quote, arrive at the Oscars, right? And before they get there, it's announced to everybody who's in the car. And they've got 2 little bleachers there of people who are either volunteers or who have been assigned, who sit in those bleachers. And those bleachers take up the whole screen of the camera. So when these people are getting out and people are cheering and yelling their names, you think it's all because everybody knows who they are and they're famous and all this. No, it's because they know that that car number is arriving next and this is the person in it, and they get out and their job is to be enthusiastic and to be loud. And they've put red carpet down the street, and they've covered all of the graffiti on all the buildings. They've put curtains up in front of all the old broken down buildings and whatnot. It's all fake. All of it is staged. All of it is imaginary. And we watch that on television and we think, oh gosh, look at that. But those stars are only employees at that point. They don't get to go where they want to go. They don't get to talk to who they want to talk to. They go where they're told to go. They're interviewed by whom they're told to be interviewed by, and they're employees. They're working at that point. They're not even in charge of themselves at that point. But from the camera angle, glamour, fame, name and fame, what a beautiful and amazing thing it is. And I tell you, seeing it that day, I was like, wow. They just have jobs like everybody else. They've got bosses telling them what to do and where to stand and all of that. And the dresses and outfits that they wear are all, given to them, not out of goodwill, but they have a responsibility to talk about who they're wearing, right? They're all asking each other, who are you wearing? I can't even imagine what I would say if somebody came up and asked me, who are you wearing? I guess, I don't know, champion, maybe, I don't know, whatever it is. So anyway, don't compare yourself to others. Don't depend on a peace and a contentment that's conditional and circumstantial. Find the shrine within, do your practice there, and build that peace within yourself. Do it constantly and often so that you generate that atmosphere of sacred within your own self, and then go into the world carrying that with you. Carry that with you everywhere you go. And that's your source of peace. That's your source of contentment. That's your source of quiet. Vivekananda says he is a real yogi who can sit in the mountain cave even when he's walking down the busy market street in San Francisco. All right, this is what we want. We want to create our cave here, and we want our relationship with the divine within. And so he's going to continue here talking about worldly people in an effort to try and convince us to stop thinking that they're all happy because they get to do what they want. Even while they live, they are not without bitterness, distrust, and fear of losing these pleasures they possess. For these very things from which they derive their greatest enjoyment often repay them with unhappiness. And it is just that this is so, that inasmuch as they seek delight in inordinate pleasures, they should not find full satisfaction without confusion and bitterness. And this is why I don't like to break the world into groups, because he's preaching about this as if it's unique to worldly people. It is absolutely not unique to worldly people. This is for your life as well. If you indulge in temporary things, all of the pleasures and joys and contentment you're going to get from them are going to be equally temporary. They're going to end. And these desires don't go away. And so if you try and find happiness through objects in the world, it's a lifelong search that will leave you bitter and old and tired when you're finished. So know this is the nature of the world, regardless of whether you're spiritual or not spiritual.
Didn't he have a qualifying condition where he specified some types of desires, basically, if I remember it, what you read correctly? It's like, where it's like it's not just some desires, it's all desires that have to be.
Yes. No, it is true. It's all desire. All desire is bondage. All desire brings misery. And this is a teaching for all of us. But see, a lot of times you find in these texts, especially in the Christian literature world, they break the world into two, the saved, and good for us, we don't have any problems. And then there's the worldly people, and look how miserable all of them are. Look how their life gives them nothing and brings them nowhere, whatnot. And it's like, that's just not a good way to think. That's an egoistic way of thinking. Anytime there's division, there's egoism. Anytime you're going into multiplicity, that's a vice. That's not a virtue. And so we should always talk as oneness, always from that perspective of oneness. And all of us learn these lessons together, because whether you're in a church or whether you're on the street, you're dealing with the conditions of life, and their actions on you will be the same, right? It's just if you are on a spiritual path, then you have an inner strength that you're working on and purposely developing and moving into a space of strength in that. Oh, how short, how false and inordinate are all the pleasures of this world. Yes, Ramakrishna goes on and on and on about that. Everything in this world has an expiration date, right? Everything has an expiration date. And we talk about the fact that the only thing you can actually get in this world is your bucket of potting soil. That's all that you can get from this world. And so if that's what you want, then this is your world. But if it's something else that you think you want, then go here, dive deep, find the gems that lay at the gate of the heart, Ramakrishna says. Oh, how short, how false and inordinate are all the pleasures of this world. But because of their excesses and blindness, worldly people do not see this. But like dumb beasts, for a few temporary and corruptible pleasures in this life, they plunge headlong into this everlasting death. Right? And why does he say this everlasting death? It's because when you chase these desires, your body identified. And if your body identified, the ultimate end for all bodies is death. And you, as identifying with the body, will experience death, right? Even though once the body drops, that delusion will cease for a moment anyway. But there's that notion, right? So the wages of sin are death, in that sin is the result of being attached to body-mind. And bodies and minds die, right? They go through that. So, my child, do not go after your lust, your concupiscence, but turn away from your own will. Delight in your God and fix your will firmly in him, and he will give you what your heart desires. Yeah. So well, there's two ways to think about it. I don't want to say align your will with your mind with God's mind, because really you're not the doer. But understand that your will and the divine will ultimately are the same. Once you purify your mind, once you remove selfishness from your mind, you and the universal will be in harmony together. And when it says you will get what your heart desires, that's the pure heart, right? And the pure heart desires oneness, desires to be what it is, to have what it already has, to be content in what it is, right? And so don't go after the longings of your body and the imaginations of your mind. Turn away from your own will, from that egoistic will, from the will that's based on body and mind conditions and circumstances. Let go of that will and delight in the divine, right? Delight in Satchitananda within, the presence of God, the presence of a pure love, unconditioned. Sit in that space. And from there, you will realize that you have all that you need, that your desires are fulfilled, because the self needs nothing. You are self-content. If you will have abundant consolation and the comfort that comes from God, you will be blessed if you hold all worldly things in contempt, cutting yourself off from all sordid gratification, and abundant consolation will be given to you. Actually, what happens is you become aware of that. When you get off the hamster wheel, when you get off the hamster wheel of desire that's in the mind caused by the body, when you step off of that, you become aware of a bliss. You become aware of Satchitananda within yourself, right? So when the mind stops being interesting to you, when the flash and glitter of the changing world loses its effect on you, and you begin to withdraw from that and turn the mind inward, turn your attention inward, that's when you become aware of all of the things that you left behind to chase these glittering desires of the senses. But we live before the senses, we live before the mind. And in that inner shrine, there is pure contentment, pure stability, pure wisdom, pure knowing, pure loving, And by pure, I mean no egoism, no sense of me and mine, my own advantage over everything else. That goes away. So me and mine gets minimized, so that the veil of ego becomes minimized. And when it's minimized, you can see slightly just beyond that veil the nature of the universe as love, the workings of God as motivated by love everywhere. So if you want to have this abundant consolation and the comfort that comes from God, you will be blessed if you hold all worldly things. And what are worldly things? Things that change, right? Things that change are worldly things. In contempt, cutting yourself from all sordid gratification, all temporary gratifications, things that are only going to require more of you in the long run. And abundant consolation will be given to you, right? Given to you, they talk in those terms. It can be viewed that way, but really from a Vedantic perspective, they're already yours. You come to realize that they have always been there. That contentment has always been your nature. Fullness has always been your nature. The more you withdraw from creature comforts, right? The more you withdraw from all of these conditions and circumstances that bring pleasurable sensations to the senses, the more you withdraw from these creature comforts, the sweeter and more lasting will be the comfort you will find in me, right? Because that comfort is here. God is always present here. And you can have that company here as soon as your mind stops being distracted by everything else. It's like sitting at the table with your favorite person, but if you can't focus and stay in conversation with them, you're noticing all the movement going on in the room. That's really breaking that relationship, right? You're sitting there trying to talk to your best friend. What are they going to think when you keep looking away in mid-sentence, or they're talking to you and you're constantly distracted and looking around the room? This is our condition when we are not established in the shrine. God is present. God is with us. God is in constant communion with us. But we're sitting there being completely distracted by everything else and looking around all over the place. And so we derive none of that beauty from that relationship, none of the sacredness of that relationship, and very little of the depth of that relationship when we're distracted like that. So we want to not be distracted. We want to be able to keep our eyes directly on the eyes of God as we're sitting there in communion together within, and to hold that stance and to hold that space regardless of the conditions and circumstances of mind and body. But in the beginning, you will not attain to these without struggle and labor, indeed, the first however long. And the length of time that you struggle will be determined by the amount of earnestness and sincerity that you're applying to your efforts. So the more compromises you make, the more mixture of good and bad that you add in there, that lengthens your path and lengthens the time before you find this peace. And that's, in one sense, that's fine. You work and get there on your own. But in another sense, you have to be careful, because if you compromise, you don't get to enjoy the fruits. You don't get to enjoy the realities of the presence within you, and you begin to think they don't exist. You begin to think that it's unreal, and you start losing that inspiration to try and to push inward, right? And you start cutting deals with the outside world. You don't want that. You don't want that, because like Thakur says, you're being robbed. All the bliss and joy of your heart are being robbed by all of those sensual ideals. So, but in the beginning, you will not attain to these without struggle and without labor, for your old habits will stand in your way, but better ones will overcome them. All right. So this is true. Our old habits are samskaras. They'll stand in the way. You've got habits that you have to overcome. This is where renunciation comes in, because on these habitual faults or these habitual delusions that we have, you discern and you discern and you discern, and they still don't go away. You can see the absurdity of your desires. You can see that they're not fulfilling. You can see that they're temporary, that they bring misery to your life. You can see all of that and still be doing them, right? So when discernment is right, meaning that you've seen all of that, but they just keep coming because of your habits, that's the time for renunciation. That's the time to bring renunciation in and just have that, what Thakur calls that one grand act of renunciation. I will not. And just cut it off. You've done the discernment, so it has lost its lie. You know the truth of that desire. And now you just have to break the habit. And that's the job of renunciation. Chink, not going to do it. Right? And you go forward. And better ones will overcome them. Yes. So that's why we don't, there's this idea that if you just empty the mind, well, you can't do that at the beginning. So what you do is you're constantly trying to replace your bad habits with good habits, right? I remember one guy one time came to me and, he had a pornography issue, and we got in the car and we went around and went to his house, and we gathered all the stuff he had there and put it in a big black trash bag. Then he took us out to this country land that he had with a camper on it, and there was a whole bunch of junk in there. So we took all that out, and everywhere that we took one of his magazines or one of his pictures from, we put up these little cards that we had printed out that had nice, inspiring scriptures on them. And we just put them everywhere where there used to be a vice of his, a picture or a magazine. Wherever there was one of those, we replaced it with one of these cards. And the idea is we can't just stop doing all these wrong things without bringing in new habits to occupy the mind in a positive way, in a way that leads you forward. So, that's very important to replace anything that you take out with something positive, something that will bring light into your life. And this is how changes become permanent. If you just leave a vacancy, then something else is going to move into that space, and that something else may be worse than what you took out. So always be proactive. The body will complain, but it will be overcome by fervor of the spirit. That's the thing to understand. Body is obedient to spirit. Spirit comes first. If you've got the spirit driving the chariot, you're going to be fine. If your body is driving the chariot, you're going to be hungry all the time. And that's how you know which is driving. Our ancient enemy, the devil, which we'll say the ego, that thing that separates us from God, that thing that separates us from everything else, that thing that tells us we're the most important. So our ancient enemy, the ego, will tempt you and hinder you if he can, but devout prayer will drive that away, right? So this devout prayer to the beloved, this devout awareness inside of the presence of God always, that is the antidote to egoism. That is the antidote to separation from the whole. That's how we begin to find the oneness. So through devout prayer, you'll drive him away. And by useful employment, right? By doing positive things. What do they say? An idle mind is the devil's playground, right? You lay around doing nothing, your mind will definitely come up with ideas of things that you can do, and it's usually desires, enjoyments, right? And they can be little ones like, oh, suddenly you want to go out to dinner, or suddenly I'm going to go out to the cafe and get myself a cup of coffee and read the newspaper. You know, things that are they're insignificant, but they're a missed opportunity. More importantly, you know, instead of going out, make yourself a little cup of coffee at home and sit in your shrine and share it with Thakur. Put a little cup on the shrine and sit there and have a cup of coffee with the divine, or sit down and listen to a chant. You know, try and memorize a chant. That'll put your mind in a beautiful space. Or just pick up your book that you're reading, some spiritual book or some helpful book, and read that. You know, if you're sitting there and lust is hammering your mind, don't just lay there and endure it. Get up and, you know, go to YouTube and watch a Hafiz poem, or listen to an Alan Watts lecture, or, you know, find any of the 9 million Swami lectures that are up there, or pick up some scripture and try to memorize a passage or something. You see, so anything that you're trying to improve, don't just stop the bad habits. Create good habits. You know, create habits that will create gold in your day. So drive him away, and by useful employment, his way will be blocked, and he will not dare to come near you. Right? So if you fill up those empty spaces with light, with things that are of the nature of light, vidya, in the Sanskrit word, then that will help you maintain that strength, that direction, that purification as we move toward God, toward the divine. All right. So just to kind of look over that chapter, it's really, we've decided not to compare yourself with others. Don't look at their lives and wish for things that they have, because that's all projection on your part. It's not real. It's not accurate. Don't base your contentment or your consolation, is the word he likes to use, that inner bliss, that inner contentment. Don't base it on things that are conditional and circumstantial. Base them on that one unchanging principle, the presence of God within the inner shrine. And do your practice and your worship in there as many times as you can to create the atmosphere in that inner temple, that sacred atmosphere, that atmosphere of stillness and holiness, so that when you go anywhere, you are going there carrying your temple, the body, with you, and you stay seated in that shrine, and that atmosphere becomes what you experience regardless of the circumstance and condition of where you are. I saw this so clearly with Swami Prabhupada, so very clearly. He established the atmosphere in the room when he walked in, because he had such a rich atmosphere inside. You know, he spent so much time with the Divine Mother in his heart. And so when he walked into the room, that atmosphere actually filled the room, not just his own inner world, but the room he entered into. I've seen him walk in many times to a room full of 20 men on football Sunday, on Super Bowl Sunday. You know, all of them in a fervor of testosterone and sports. And I've seen Swami Prabhupada walk into there, and the whole room immediately comes down to a stillness. And this is what it is to be human. This is what it is to find your nature. Okay, so we look for it there within. We understand that the nature of all of the desires in the world are not lasting and actually bring misery in their wake. And so he says for us to get away from that, we want to keep all of those desires at arm's length. And we do that through a devout prayer. And devout prayer is the same thing as being aware of the presence, being in the presence, like Brother Lawrence used to practice. And to cut yourself off from all of the gratification of those things and to replace those bad habits with good habits, right? And that in the beginning we're going to struggle, but we push our old habits out of the way. We come up with better ones to replace them with, to keep us moving in that directory, that trajectory. So I was thinking. The body will complain, no doubt. Try and control your body. Oh God, try and change your get up time. You know, I've tried since that retreat to get up an hour earlier than I used to every morning. Oh my goodness gracious. What a toddler of a mind I have. It complains every morning. It just sits there. And I try desperately not to let it be a conversation, right? Because that's my principle. It's like, nope, the alarm is not a conversation. It's a call to action. If the alarm goes off, get up. It's not a suggestion. It's get up. And you don't think another thought. You don't have a second thought. The alarm goes off, you're up, period. You know, so many times when we're trying to discipline the mind or discipline the body into better habits, the mind and body think it's a conversation. They don't understand it's a decision. It's a command. They think it's a conversation that we're going to have when the alarm goes off an hour early. Oh, I can sleep in for 10 more minutes. That's not a problem. You know, oh, well, last night I sort of didn't intend to get up at that time this morning. I can get up an hour later. Oh, I have nothing to get up for this morning. Right? I'm intimately aware of these things, you guys. I can go on for days of how the mind has alternative plans for everything you want to do. You know, if you want to get your house clean, then tell your mind you want to go into the shrine and meditate. The mind will suddenly remember, oh no, I'll just get those few dishes done real quick. Oh, let me just get my laundry put in real fast. Oh, let me just sweep the front porch and then I'll do, you know, this is the nature of the mind. It's a toddler. And if we're not living lives of awareness, right, lives of presence, we just get caught up like that all the time. We're never living a focused, a purposeful life. You know, we're just being pulled from one thing to the next. So the body will complain, but give it up. Through purity, we attain the mind of God. And when we have the mind of God, the universe will serve us. The universe will point the way and remind us constantly of our nature. And so that's why we want to work hard in the beginning, get the sail up so that the winds of grace can catch it and carry us forward. All right. It's a good place to stop for tonight.